Today we are going to learn another kind of graph, and this is called a line graph. So we've worked with pictographs, which uses, pictographs, which uses pictures to represent data, bar graphs, which represents bars to represent data. And line graph, as you might have guessed from the name, uses lines. And line graphs are usually used when you want to show a change over time. A change over time. And usually the time is in the bottom axis. Okay, so let me give an example of a line graph like this. And I'm gonna mark out a few time periods here. Okay, so let's say that this was in January, February, March, April, and May. And on this side, I'm going to have the number of students. The number of students who got an A in math class. Okay, so let's have 2, 4, 6, 8. Right, January, I'm gonna have the dot be about here, February about there, March about here, April about here, and May about here. And because it's a line graph, you need to connect these dots with a line. So how do you read this line graph? As you can see, it has a line to represent data. And in January, you see this point right here. It's in between 4 and 2. So I'm assuming it's going to be 3. And this means in January, there were 3 students who got an A on the math test. In February, there were 6 students who got an A on the math test. In March, there were 8 students who got an A on the math test. In April, there were 6 students who got an A on the math test. And in May, there were 5 students in between 6 and 4 here who got an A on the math test. So with this line graph, you can kind of see how the students were doing in math class over 5 months. Right? So the students started to do really good towards March, and then they kind of went downhill after that. Okay, so if you have a line graph like this, it's easy to see the pattern over time, or how the data is changing over time. Okay, so that's where line graphs are usually used. And usually this axis right here is time, or something that represents time. Okay, so let's try. Let's go over here. Let's try and draw a line graph given some data. So now this can be the number of books read by, number of books read by Julia for 6 months. And in January, she read 2 books. In February, she read 3 books. March, say that she read 1 book. In April, she read 2 books. In May, she read 2 books, and in June, she read 3 books. So we have this data here, and let's draw a line graph with this data. So we need the axis like this, and down here, we always use time down here. Okay, so let's put these months here. So we have January, February, March, April, May, and June. We need to extend this part here, and it's good if we have designated point for each of those months. Right, and on this side here, we're gonna have the number of books. So since our number of book goes from the lowest is from 1 and the highest is 3, so we don't actually have to go by 2s. We can just write 1, 2, 3, and you can even write up to a 4 if you want. And in January, she read 2 books. So on this line here, you go up to 2 right here. Right? That matches up with the 2 here. On February, you go up until 3 right here. On March, you just go up 1. On April, you go up 2. On May, again, you go 2. And on June, you go 3. And it looks kind of weird. It's hard to see the data like this. So you connect the dots with a line. And when you do this, I advise you that you use a ruler so that the lines are straight. If the lines are not straight, it's going to be a little bit deceptive. Okay, so if you connected the lines like this, or connect the dots with a line like this, you can kind of see a pattern over time. Julia's been reading well for the first half, and then she went downhill towards the middle, and then she went up again, right? So you can kind of see the pattern of how she reads books. So that's why we use line graphs. It shows us the change in data over time, and it's an easy way to see data like that. Okay, so you can draw line graphs using data like this, or given a line graph, you should know how to read the data from a line graph.